The morning of my 75th birthday dawned with an uncharacteristic softness for late autumn in New England. A gentle mist still clung to the bare branches of the oak tree outside my bedroom window, promising a crisp, bright day once the sun finally burned through. I lay in bed, tracing the familiar floral pattern on my worn quilt, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. 75. A milestone, they say. For me, it felt more like a quiet whisper from the past, a gentle reminder of all the years that had woven themselves into the tapestry of my life. I was Eleanor Vance, a widow for 7 years now, a retired literature teacher who had once filled young minds with the poetry of Frost and the fierce independence of Austen. Now, my days were mostly filled with the quiet companionship of books, the rhythmic click of my knitting needles, and the occasional, almost desperate, anticipation of a phone call. My home, this rambling 2-story house filled with memories and dust motes dancing in sunbeams, was both my sanctuary and, increasingly, my cage. Today, however, was different. Today, Sarah was coming. My daughter. My only child. She'd called last week, a hurried, breathless conversation amidst what I imagined were her usual demanding work calls and social obligations. "Mom, don't you dare cook a thing," she'd chirped, her voice a little too bright. "I'm taking you out. A real birthday lunch. Just us." A small flutter of warmth, fragile as a butterfly's wing, had spread in my chest. Sarah wasn't always the most attentive, I knew that. Life in the suburbs, with her ambitious husband, Mark, and their 2 perpetually busy teenagers, had pulled her further and further away from my quiet orbit. Her visits were rare, her calls often brief. But today, she remembered. Today, she was coming. It was a lifeline, a reaffirmation that I wasn't entirely forgotten, that some tether still bound me to the vibrant, bustling world outside these walls. I dressed carefully, choosing my favorite cashmere cardigan, the one Mark had bought me years ago, and a simple string of pearls. I brushed my thinning white hair until it shone, a faint halo around my head. I even dabbed a touch of rose-scented lotion behind my ears, a small, forgotten ritual from a younger, more hopeful me. The house, for once, felt lighter, filled with an almost palpable hum of anticipation. At precisely 11 o'clock, the familiar glint of Sarah's silver SUV pulled into my driveway. My heart gave a little skip. I hurried to the door, a wide, expectant smile on my face. She emerged, sleek and stylish, in a tailored pantsuit, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She looked, as always, utterly put together, the antithesis of my own quiet, fading existence. "Mom, happy birthday," she exclaimed, her voice a little louder than necessary, and gave me a quick, almost professional hug, her cheek brushing mine. There was a faint scent of expensive perfume, and something else, a hint of stress, perhaps, or a carefully controlled urgency. "Sarah, darling, you're here." I beamed, trying to infuse my voice with all the joy I felt. "Come in, have some tea, I baked your favorite lemon loaf." She waved a dismissive hand. "No time, Mom, sorry. We've got a reservation. A really lovely place, a little drive, but worth it. It's a surprise." A surprise. I loved surprises. My smile widened. "Oh, how wonderful. Let me just grab my purse." The drive was longer than I expected, stretching past familiar leafy suburbs and then into an area I didn't recognize. Sarah chattered, a stream of anecdotes about her children's latest achievements, a new project at work, a recent trip. She spoke with an almost frantic energy, never quite looking me in the eye, her gaze darting between the road and her rearview mirror. I nodded, listened, offering small, appreciative comments, thrilled just to hear her voice, to be a part of her world for a little while. Then she took an unexpected turn down a long, winding driveway, lined with perfectly manicured evergreens. At the end stood a large, imposing brick building, modern and sterile, with a sign out front that read, "Evergreen Meadows, Assisted Living and Memory Care." My heart lurched. "Sarah, darling, what is this place?" She pulled into a visitor's spot, cutting the engine. The sudden silence in the car felt deafening. She turned to me then, her smile fixed, a little too tight. Mom, she began, her voice carefully modulated, this is your surprise. It's a wonderful new chapter for you. My blood ran cold. A new chapter? What are you talking about, dear? The words felt thick on my tongue. She reached over and took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Mom, we've talked about this. You're alone in that big house. It's too much for you. You need professional care, activities, companionship. Evergreen Meadows is top-notch. They have everything here. The world tilted. Professional care? Activities? Companionship? The words echoed in my ears, hollow and meaningless. I looked out at the building, at the carefully constructed facade of care and comfort, and saw only a gilded cage. But my house. My books. My garden, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. And my birthday lunch? Sarah's smile faltered, replaced by a practiced look of concerned patience. Mom, we can visit your house sometimes. And your books can come with you. As for lunch, we can have it right here in their lovely dining room, after you get settled. Look, they even have a beautiful garden, just like yours. She gestured vaguely towards a patch of manicured lawn with a few sad-looking flower beds. I looked at her, truly looked at her. Her eyes, usually so expressive, were distant, almost clinical. There was no warmth, no hesitation, no genuine sorrow. Just a detached efficiency, as if she were executing a difficult but necessary business transaction. But today is my birthday, Sarah, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. She sighed, a small, exasperated sound. I know, Mom. And I thought this would be the best gift. A fresh start. For both of us. For both of us. The implication hung heavy in the air. For her, a burden lifted. For me, a life ended. She got out of the car, opened the passenger door, and gently, firmly, helped me out. My legs felt strangely weak, my head light. She retrieved a small suitcase from the trunk, a suitcase I didn't remember packing, and handed it to me. Your essentials, she said, almost brightly. We'll bring more later. We walked into the brightly lit lobby, a cavernous space filled with the faint scent of disinfectant and the muted chatter of distant voices. A young woman with a kind smile greeted us. Sarah quickly explained that I was the new resident, Eleanor Vance. The paperwork was already handled, she assured them. I stood there, clutching my small suitcase, a lifetime of memories packed into a single, flimsy bag. I watched as Sarah exchanged pleasantries with the staff, her voice confident, charming. She looked so in control, so utterly detached. Then, she turned back to me. Well, Mom, I really must run. Mark needs me for something important, and the kids have practice. But I'll call you tonight, okay? And I'll visit next week. You'll love it here, I promise. She leaned in, kissed my forehead, a dry, fleeting touch. Sarah, I began, but the word caught in my throat. My voice was gone. She gave me another tight smile, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking purposefully on the polished floor. She didn't look back. She simply walked out the door, climbed into her silver SUV, and drove away, leaving me standing in the sterile, unfamiliar lobby of Evergreen Meadows, alone with my small suitcase, a ghost in a foreign land. It was my 75th birthday, and my daughter had just abandoned me. The world outside had promised a crisp, bright day, but inside, a bitter, icy despair began to bloom. The first few days in Evergreen Meadows blurred into a dull, monotonous haze. Each morning, the same routine. A brisk knock on the door, the clatter of a meal tray, the sterile scent of antiseptic that clung to everything like a second skin. My room, a small, impersonal space with a single window overlooking a patch of lawn, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed cell. The furniture was functional, the bed firm, the walls painted a neutral beige that seemed to absorb any trace of color or warmth. My few belongings, the framed photograph of Mark and me, my favorite worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, and the single small suitcase Sarah had left, felt like pitiful outposts in a vast, indifferent landscape. I tried to call Sarah. Again and again. Each time, her voicemail message, bright and cheerful, mocked me. You've reached Sarah Vance. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. She never did. Not that day, not the next. The silence on the other end of the line was a cold, hard confirmation of what I already knew. I had been discarded. My fellow residents shuffled through the brightly lit hallways, their faces etched with varying degrees of resignation, confusion, or a blank, unsettling peace. Some smiled vaguely, their eyes distant. Others mumbled to themselves, lost in their own private labyrinths. I watched them, a profound sense of despair settling over me. Was this to be my future? To fade away, slowly, anonymously, within these antiseptic walls? The food was bland, served on plastic trays. The conversations at meal times, when they happened, were fragmented, often circling back to complaints about forgotten medication or the weather. I, who had once debated literary masterpieces and dissected complex philosophical ideas with sharp-witted students, now found myself nodding politely at stories of grandchildren I would never meet or recounting the mundane details of my youth to an audience whose attention wavered like a dying candle flame. The days stretched out, long and empty. I sat by my window, watching the seasons change on the lonely oak outside, a stark contrast to the vibrant, blossoming life I'd left behind. My garden, my beloved roses, my library. A painful ache settled in my chest, a constant, dull throb. It wasn't just the physical separation, it was the severance of an entire life, the tearing of roots that had run deep. But amidst the pervasive sense of gloom, there was one flicker of kindness. Martha, a young nurse with bright, empathetic eyes and a perpetually harried but gentle demeanor, often paused by my door. She was perhaps in her late 20s, her brown hair usually pulled back in a messy bun, a faint spray of freckles across her nose. Unlike some of the other staff, who seemed to view the residents as tasks to be managed, Martha saw people. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," she'd say, her voice soft. "Slept well." I'd usually offer a non-committal response, too numb to truly engage. But Martha was persistent, in a quiet, unobtrusive way. She'd bring me an extra cup of hot tea if she saw me looking particularly forlorn. She'd linger for a moment, adjusting my blanket or just meeting my gaze with a look of genuine concern. One afternoon, a few days after my arrival, I was sitting by the window, staring blankly at nothing, when Martha came in to check my vitals. She moved efficiently, but her touch was gentle. "You know," she said, her voice low, as she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, "you don't seem like the others, Mrs. Vance." I looked at her surprised. "Oh? And what am I like, Martha?" She smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips. "You have a fire in your eyes. Even when they're sad. Most of them, they've just given up. But you're different. You're watching everything. You're still thinking." Her words, simple as they were, pierced through the fog of my despair. A fire in my eyes? I hadn't felt a flicker of warmth since Sarah left. But Martha saw it. She saw me. "My daughter," I began, the words catching. She left me here on my birthday." Martha's eyes softened further. "I know, Mrs. Vance. I saw your admission papers. I'm so sorry." She paused, then added, almost conspiratorially, "It happens more often than you'd think. People get old, inconvenient. Families, they just don't want to deal with it." Her honesty, raw and unvarnished, was a strange comfort. It validated my pain, acknowledged the injustice. It also hinted at a deeper understanding of the world, one that went beyond the polished facades and polite smiles. "I just don't understand," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. I always thought we were close." Martha finished her task, then pulled up a chair beside my bed, an unusual act in the busy, time-crunched schedule. "Families are complicated, Mrs. Vance. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. But sometimes," she continued, a faint glimmer of something defiant in her eyes, "it's those very hurts that wake us up. Make us see things we didn't want to see before." She stayed for a few more minutes, talking about nothing in particular, but her presence, her quiet understanding, was a balm. When she finally left, a small, almost imperceptible shift had occurred within me. The despair was still there, a heavy cloak, but underneath, a tiny spark had ignited. A spark of anger, perhaps. Or perhaps, just perhaps, a spark of something else entirely. A question. A challenge. I was Eleanor Vance. And I was not given up. Not yet. The tiny spark Martha had ignited within me refused to be extinguished, even amidst the persistent gloom of evergreen meadows. It smoldered, a pinprick of rebellion in the vast expanse of my resignation. Her words, "You're still thinking," resonated. And she was right. I was thinking about Sarah, about her perfectly coiffed hair and her dismissive wave. Thinking about the empty promises and the cold, unyielding silence. And with each thought, the raw wound of betrayal began to scab over, hardening into a quiet, simmering resolve. I spent the next few days in a strange state of heightened awareness. I observed my surroundings with the keen eye of a literary critic dissecting a text. The residents, once a homogeneous blur of old age, began to emerge as individuals. The perpetually cheerful woman who hummed old hymns, the man who meticulously polished his eyeglasses every hour, the quiet, solitary woman who always had a novel open in her lap but rarely seemed to turn a page. I saw their stories, their silent struggles, and suddenly, my own despair felt less unique, less isolating. One afternoon, I decided to unpack the few remaining items in my suitcase. It was a futile act, really. There was nothing of true importance left. My books were mostly gone, given away or stored in boxes in an attic I might never see again. My precious mementos were scattered. But the act of sorting, of touching familiar objects, felt like a small assertion of control in a life that had been utterly derailed. I pulled out a worn leather photo album, its pages filled with faded images of Mark and me, of a younger, vibrant Sarah, of holidays and family gatherings. A pang of loss, sharp and familiar, shot through me. Beneath the album, tucked into a side pocket of the suitcase, I felt a stiff, thin rectangle of paper. I pulled it out. It was a lottery ticket. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through me. This wasn't just any ticket. This was the ticket. The one I'd bought on my birthday, just hours before Sarah had arrived. It was a ridiculous, sentimental habit I'd shared with Mark for decades. Every birthday, every anniversary, every Christmas, we'd buy a lottery ticket together. Not because we ever truly believed we'd win, we were too pragmatic for that, but because it was our shared, absurd little ritual of hope. A tiny, foolish rebellion against the mundane, a whispered promise of what if. After Mark passed, I'd continued the tradition, a quiet nod to his memory, a private conversation with a ghost. I remembered buying it that morning, a brief stop at the corner store on my way home from the pharmacy. The numbers, chosen by Mark years ago, our anniversary, Sarah's birth date, the number of our first house, a lucky 7. Silly, superstitious numbers, yet sacred to us. I stared at the slip of paper, its cheap print a stark contrast to the emotional weight it carried. My first instinct was to crumple it, to dismiss it as another reminder of a life irrevocably lost, of hopes now dashed. But then, Martha's words echoed in my mind again. "You're still thinking." And a new thought, cold and calculating, began to form. What if? There was a small communal room down the hall, with a television and, more importantly, a stack of old newspapers. My hands trembled slightly as I made my way there, the ticket clutched tightly in my palm. The room was empty, save for the faint hum of the television on a nature channel. I found a newspaper from a few days prior, open to the lottery results page. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. My breath hitched. I unfolded the ticket, smoothed its edges, and then, with a strange detachment, began to compare the numbers. The first number. Match. The second. Match. The third. Match. My vision blurred. A tremor ran through my entire body, not of fear, but of an electrifying, impossible realization. My fingers traced the printed digits, my eyes scanning, then rescanning, then scanning again, as if to prove the truth wrong. Every single number. A perfect, undeniable match. It wasn't one of those astronomical Powerball jackpots that screamed headlines and changed lives with a single swoop. No, it was a more modest sum, but substantial enough to be utterly transformative for someone like me. $300,000. $300,000. The number echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. It was enough. More than enough. Enough to buy my freedom. Enough to rebuild, to choose. Enough to make the ultimate statement. A wave of emotions, hot and cold, surged through me. Shock, first and foremost. Then disbelief, quickly followed by a profound, almost dizzying sense of irony. My own daughter, in her haste to rid herself of a perceived burden, had thrown me away on the very day I had unknowingly bought my ticket to liberation. The universe, in its dark, comedic wisdom, had seen fit to deliver this bitter, glorious punchline. A laugh, a sharp, disbelieving bark escaped my lips. It was a strange, raw sound, devoid of mirth, yet filled with a potent, exhilarating sense of power. The despair that had clung to me for days suddenly felt thin, translucent. It was replaced by something entirely new, a hard, glittering edge of determination. My old life was gone. Sarah had seen to that. But this was a new hand of cards. And I, Eleanor Vance, the discarded old woman, suddenly held all the aces. My quiet life had indeed been a mask. And now the mask was off. The laughter, that strange, almost feral sound, died as quickly as it had begun, leaving a buzzing silence in its wake. The lottery ticket, still clutched in my trembling hand, felt impossibly heavy. $300,000. The number reverberated in my mind, a sacred mantra, a whispered promise. It wasn't the kind of sum that bought private jets or island estates, but it was enough to buy something far more valuable: freedom. My freedom. My first instinct, a primal, overwhelming urge, was to shout it from the rooftops. To find Martha, to find any sympathetic ear, and declare my impossible fortune. But then, a cold, sharp blade of caution sliced through the elation. Sarah. If she ever discovered this, she would descend upon me like a hawk on a helpless mouse, demanding, manipulating, reclaiming what she would undoubtedly believe was her due. No. This secret, this incredible, life-altering secret, had to remain mine alone. For now. I folded the ticket carefully, meticulously, pressing it flat between my palms as if to absorb its power. Then, I tucked it deep into the inner pocket of my cardigan, a place where only my own hand would venture. My heart still hammered, but it was no longer with despair. It was with a fierce, almost terrifying, sense of purpose. I walked back to my room, the sterile hallways of evergreen meadows suddenly seeming less suffocating, more like a temporary staging ground. My small, impersonal room, once a symbol of my confinement, now felt like a strategic outpost. I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind racing. The quiet, analytical part of me, the former teacher who delighted in dissecting complex plots, took over. What was the plan? First, I needed to understand my position. I was an elder, placed in assisted living against my will, though Sarah had undoubtedly signed documents indicating my agreement. I needed to know what rights I had. Could I simply leave? Would Sarah have any legal claim over me, or worse, over my money? My gaze drifted to the corridor. I had noticed him before, a man who sat in the communal lounge almost perpetually, his nose buried in a book, often a hefty tome on law or finance. Mr. Henderson. He had a perpetually sour expression, a thin, almost invisible scar bisecting one eyebrow, and a habit of making surprisingly acerbic, yet often insightful, comments during meal times. He carried himself with the air of someone who had once commanded respect and still expected it, despite his current circumstances. Later that afternoon, I found him in his usual spot, a thick volume on corporate litigation open on his lap. He barely glanced up as I approached, merely grunting in acknowledgement. Mr. Henderson, I began, my voice a little steadier than I expected. May I trouble you for a moment? He slowly lowered his book, peering at me over the top of his reading glasses, his eyes, though roomy, sharp. Mrs. Vance, isn't it? The one whose daughter brought her in on her birthday. A rather unsubtle move, even by modern standards. His tone was dry, without a hint of pity. It was precisely what I needed. Precisely, I affirmed, pulling up an empty chair. And I believe I detect in your observation a certain legal understanding. He gave a short, humorless chuckle. Retired corporate lawyer, Mrs. Vance. For my sins. What's on your mind? Don't tell me your daughter is trying to get you to sign over your last silver spoon. I met his gaze directly. Something like that. I'm trying to understand my options. My rights as a resident here. And as an individual. If, hypothetically, I were to decide to relocate. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Hypothetically, of course. Well, hypothetically, Mrs. Vance, your rights depend largely on the fine print. Did you sign anything yourself upon arrival? Or did your daughter sign for you? Sarah signed everything, I admitted, a bitter taste in my mouth. As expected, he nodded. Then, hypothetically, your daughter likely has power of attorney, or something similar, which gives her considerable sway. Unless, of course, you can prove you are of sound mind and capable of making your own decisions. Which, judging by your hypothetical query, I'd say you are. And if I wanted to revoke that power of attorney? I asked, pushing the hypothetical. That, Mrs. Vance, requires a lawyer. And a very clear demonstration of your capacity. And resources, naturally. He paused, his gaze assessing. Are you implying you have resources, Mrs. Vance? I held his gaze, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. Let's just say, Mr. Henderson, that sometimes, even in the bleakest of winters, a surprising seed can still find a way to sprout. He looked at me for a long moment, then a slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his own lips. Indeed. A very literary metaphor, Mrs. Vance. I always appreciate a good turn of phrase. I can give you the name of a trustworthy notary, a man who handles wills and such. He could, hypothetically, advise you on your capacity. And your options. He scribbled a name and number on a small piece of paper from his book. Richard Sterling. Tell him Arthur Henderson sent you. He owes me a favor. I took the paper, my fingers brushing against his. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Hypothetically, of course. He returned to his book, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Good luck, Mrs. Vance. This place can be a tomb, but it doesn't have to be a final resting place. His words, cynical yet laced with a subtle encouragement, cemented my resolve. The fire Martha had seen in my eyes now burned brighter, fueled by the $300,000 and the cold, hard advice of Mr. Henderson. This wasn't just about leaving Evergreen Meadows. This was about reclaiming my life, about rewriting my own story. And the first step was secrecy. No one, absolutely no one, could know about the last ticket. Not yet. The name and number on the slip of paper, Richard Sterling, felt like a key in my hand, a tangible link to the world outside Evergreen Meadows. The next morning, under the guise of needing to buy some personal items, I convinced Martha to arrange a brief outing for me. She was hesitant, citing the usual protocols, but my quiet insistence, coupled with a rare flash of my old teacher's authority, seemed to sway her. Perhaps she saw the fire she'd spoken of, now burning with a clearer, more determined flame. The chill autumn air on my face, the rumble of a taxi, the brief, exhilarating glimpse of the bustling streets, it was a sensory overload after days of sterile confinement. My first stop, as planned, was the bank. With the lottery ticket carefully presented and verified, the process was surprisingly swift and discreet. The teller, a young woman with a polite smile, treated me with a deference I hadn't received in years. It was a subtle, yet potent, reminder of the power of money. The funds were transferred to a new, private account, established under my maiden name, Eleanor Hayes, a small, symbolic gesture of independence. Next, I made my way to Richard Sterling's office. He was a man in his late 50s, with a kind, unassuming face and keen, intelligent eyes. Mr. Henderson's name was indeed a magic word. Richard listened patiently as I explained, in broad strokes, my situation, carefully omitting the lottery win for now, focusing instead on my desire to revoke Sarah's power of attorney and to secure my legal autonomy. He asked thoughtful questions, his expression unwavering. He confirmed what Mr. Henderson had hinted at, proving my sound mind was paramount, and with my clear articulation and detailed memory, it would be a straightforward process. Within days, the legal wheels were set in motion. My next priority was a new home. Not a grand estate, not a sprawling mansion, but a sanctuary. A place where I could breathe, think, and rebuild. I spent hours online at the public library, a small rebellion in itself, searching for small, quiet apartments for rent. I found a charming, sun-drenched two-bedroom unit in a historic brownstone, not too far from my old neighborhood, but far enough to feel like a complete break. It had a small balcony, perfect for potted plants and the promise of a quiet life. The landlord, a kind elderly woman, seemed to take an immediate liking to me. The lottery winnings, discreetly transferred, ensured the deposit and first few months' rent were secured without a hitch. The final act of severance was the simplest, yet perhaps the most emotionally significant, changing my phone number. It felt like cutting a cord, a deliberate, irreversible act of liberation from Sarah's silent tyranny. The old number, the one she refused to answer, the one through which she might someday attempt to reassert control, was gone. My new number was unlisted, known only to Richard and, eventually, Martha, whom I knew I could trust. This wasn't just a practical decision, it was a profound declaration of independence. Meanwhile, back at Evergreen Meadows, my abrupt departure had caused a small ripple. The staff, used to the slow, predictable rhythms of the facility, were initially confused. Sarah, after days of unanswered calls to my old number, finally contacted the facility. Her tone, according to Martha, who relayed this to me later in a hushed phone call, was one of bewildered indignation. "Where is she? Why wasn't I informed?" she demanded. The staff could only confirm I had left, of my own volition, and that my whereabouts were confidential. The legal documents Richard had filed had quietly done their work. Sarah's bewilderment soon escalated into a frantic scramble. She tried calling mutual acquaintances, friends from my bridge club, even distant relatives, fishing for information. Each person reported back to me, through new, discreet channels I established, how increasingly agitated Sarah sounded. She couldn't fathom my sudden disappearance. It was as if I had simply evaporated. The narrative she had carefully constructed, that I was a frail, dependent old woman, was crumbling around her. As I settled into my new apartment, surrounded by the comforting scent of fresh paint and the soft glow of a setting sun, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. My new, chosen life was unfolding. But I knew this peace was fragile. The confrontation was coming. Sarah wouldn't simply let me go. She never had. One evening, as I was struggling to connect my new Wi-Fi, a knock came at my door. It was a young man, perhaps early 20s, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a friendly, open face. "Hi," he said, a little shyly. "I'm Daniel. I live next door. Heard you just moved in. Saw you wrestling with that router. Need a hand?" I hesitated, my ingrained caution flaring. But his smile was genuine, and his eyes held no hint of guile. "That would be immensely helpful, Daniel," I admitted, a small smile escaping my lips. He was quick and efficient, sorting out the internet in minutes. As he worked, we chatted. He was a college student, studying computer science, living alone while his parents were overseas. He seemed bright, earnest, and surprisingly good-natured. A seed of an idea began to form in my mind. Daniel, with his tech savvy, might be just the ally I needed. Not just for Wi-Fi, but for something far more crucial. I had questions about Sarah's life, her financial situation, things I couldn't possibly uncover on my own. Daniel, I suspected, held a different kind of key. Daniel became my unlikely tech guru, a breath of fresh air in the quiet solitude of my new apartment. He'd pop over a few times a week, ostensibly to check on my Wi-Fi or to show me some new function on my tablet, but more often, we'd simply talk. He was curious about my life, a respectful and engaging listener, and I found myself sharing snippets of my past, carefully omitting the more painful details of my recent abandonment. His youthful energy was infectious, and his genuine kindness a stark contrast to Sarah's cold calculation. It was during one of these casual sessions that I broached the subject, carefully, testing the waters. "Daniel," I began, my gaze fixed on the laptop screen as if deep in thought about email settings, "my daughter, Sarah. She's had some financial difficulties recently. I've always tried to help her, but I sometimes wonder if I truly understood the extent of her situation. Daniel, ever practical, paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Financial difficulties, Mrs. Vance? Like, trouble paying bills, or bigger than that? I sighed, feigning a weary resignation. Well, she often asked for loans. Temporary setbacks, she'd call them. And her husband, Mark, he always seemed to be chasing the next big thing, the next surefire investment. I chose my words carefully, painting a picture of a concerned, if slightly naive, mother. Daniel nodded slowly, a knowing look on his face. Yeah, that sounds familiar. My cousin's always got a can't-miss opportunity that ends up costing him. You know, Mrs. Vance, sometimes you can find a lot of public information about people's finances, especially if there are any official records, like bankruptcies, foreclosures, or even just liens. It's all out there if you know where to look. A thrill, cold and calculated, ran through me. Really? I asked, trying to sound merely curious. I had no idea. Oh yeah, he confirmed, already tapping away. Just gotta know the right databases. Public records are usually accessible. For things like property deeds, court filings, you'd be surprised. And so, my quiet investigation began. Under the guise of wanting to understand modern research techniques or keep up with the times, I enlisted Daniel's unwitting help. Thinking he was simply teaching an eager senior how to navigate the digital world, showed me how to access county records, property tax assessments, and even rudimentary credit reporting sites, though for those, I had to provide him with carefully fabricated reasons for needing access to certain names and addresses, always framed around some distant, supposedly lost relative. The picture that emerged was far darker, far more tangled than I could have ever imagined. Sarah's temporary setbacks were a sprawling web of debt. There were multiple mortgages on her house, some of them taken out against an inflated valuation. Credit card debts that stretched into the tens of thousands. Loans from various, increasingly shady-looking online lenders. And Mark. Mark was even worse. His surefire investments were a trail of failed businesses, foreclosures, and even a minor legal judgment for a fraudulent scheme from years ago, carefully buried in the archives. My mind reeled. Flashbacks, sharp and painful, assaulted me. Sarah's calls, always perfectly timed to coincide with a new urgent expense. Her tearful pleas about the children's tuition, or an unexpected car repair, or a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity that she and Mark just knew would pay off. And me, always opening my purse, trying to be the supportive mother, the safety net. Each time, a small part of me had questioned, a flicker of doubt, but I'd pushed it down, attributing it to my age, my overprotective nature. I wanted so desperately to believe in her, to believe that our bond was stronger than any financial strain. Now, with Daniel's innocent clicks and scrolls, the truth was laid bare. I hadn't just been helping her. I had been enabling a lifestyle built on sand, meticulously hidden beneath a veneer of suburban normalcy. My own home, my sanctuary, had been quietly targeted, too. Daniel, showing me how to look up property deeds, inadvertently revealed that Sarah had, at one point, investigated the possibility of taking out a reverse mortgage on my house. The paperwork was incomplete, thankfully, but the intent was undeniable. She hadn't just intended to put me in a nursing home, she intended to liquidate my assets. The raw pain of betrayal, which had initially felt like a dull ache, sharpened into a searing fury. It wasn't just about the money, though that was significant. It was about the cold, calculated deception. The way she had used my love, my trust, against me. I had been a resource, a mark, not a mother. One evening, after Daniel had left, proud of having shown me how to organize my digital files, I sat alone, surrounded by the glow of the laptop screen, the cold, hard facts of Sarah's deceit staring back at me. I thought of Clara, a woman I'd met briefly at Evergreen Meadows when I was arranging to have my few remaining personal items brought over. Clara, a woman with eyes that held a universe of sorrow, who had quietly told me how her own children had systematically stripped her of everything she owned, leaving her with nothing but a photo album and a broken heart. Her story, which I had initially heard with detached sympathy, now resonated with a chilling, personal clarity. My story was not unique. It was a pattern, a predatory dance played out across countless families. But I was not Clara. I had been given a second chance, an unexpected lifeline. The lottery ticket wasn't just money, it was a weapon. And I, Eleanor Vance, was learning how to wield it. The quiet, gentle teacher was gone. In her place, a strategist, a survivor, was slowly but surely taking shape. And with each revelation about Sarah's deceit, my resolve to not just survive, but to truly live, on my own terms, by my own rules, grew stronger. I knew then, with an absolute certainty, that my will, the one that currently named Sarah as my sole beneficiary, would have to be changed. And it would be a testament not to vengeance, but to justice. The more Daniel, innocently performing his tech-savvy neighborly duties, uncovered about Sarah's financial quagmire, the clearer the picture of her desperation became. It was a kaleidoscope of bad decisions, hidden expenses, and outright lies. I found a record of a recent foreclosure on a rental property Sarah and Mark had owned, one she had always claimed was a great investment. There were whispers, too, of gambling debts on Mark's side, debts that had quietly but consistently siphoned away their income. My heart, once heavy with maternal guilt, now hardened with a chilling understanding. This wasn't just irresponsibility, it was a carefully constructed house of cards, constantly on the verge of collapse. And I, her mother, had been expected to be the ever-present, ever-replenishing foundation. The thought of Sarah trying to get a reverse mortgage on my house gnawed at me. It wasn't just a desperate act, it felt like a violation. My home, the one Mark and I had built together, the one filled with memories of children's laughter and quiet evenings, was not just a piece of property to me. It was a living embodiment of my life, my legacy. The idea that she would so casually attempt to convert it into cash to fuel her reckless lifestyle was a wound that cut deeper than any financial loss. As I immersed myself in my new life, away from the watchful, often indifferent, eyes of evergreen meadows, the frantic attempts of Sarah to locate me intensified. My new, unlisted number remained silent. She tried calling my old bridge club friends, women who, while polite, quickly conveyed her desperation back to me through Martha, my trusted confidant. "She sounds absolutely beside herself, Eleanor," one friend relayed. "Keeps asking if you mentioned anything about moving, about where you'd gone." The messages she left on my old, now disconnected, voicemail were forwarded to me by the phone company, a service I'd requested for historical records. They began as bewildered, then escalated into frustrated, and finally took on an increasingly sharp, demanding edge. "Mom, this isn't funny anymore. Where are you? The facility said you just left. What happened? Are you okay?" Her voice, initially tinged with a feigned concern, quickly gave way to a thinly veiled accusation. "You can't just disappear, Mom. We're worried sick. Call me immediately." Then, the veiled threats. "Mom, if you're doing this to be difficult, it's really not fair to me and Mark. You know how much we have on our plates. And you know, legally, this is all very complicated. We have your power of attorney. You need to call us." The irony was almost suffocating. She was using the very legal instruments she had manipulated to abandon me, now as a means to control me. But she didn't know I had already taken steps to nullify them. The thought filled me with a quiet, fierce satisfaction. It was during this period of heightened tension that Richard Sterling, my notary and now trusted legal advisor, arranged a meeting. He arrived at my apartment with a briefcase, his face solemn but kind. "Eleanor," he began, "I have drafted the new will, as per your instructions. It's quite explicit." I nodded, my resolve unwavering. This was the moment. The final, definitive act of severing ties, of reclaiming my narrative. The old will, which had designated Sarah as the sole beneficiary, was a relic of a past built on blind love and misplaced trust. The new one would be a testament to a truth I had only recently uncovered. We sat at my small dining table, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, illuminating the crisp, legal pages. He explained each clause, each stipulation. Sarah's name was mentioned, yes, but only to explicitly state her exclusion from the bulk of the estate. Instead, a significant portion was allocated to various charities I had long supported, a small but meaningful amount to Martha for her kindness, and, surprisingly, a fund to be established in my name at the local library, dedicated to supporting literacy programs for seniors. The remaining, more modest portion would be divided amongst distant relatives and a few trusted friends. And for Sarah? Richard asked, looking up from the document, his gaze gentle. You wanted to leave her a symbolic amount, enough for a fresh start, but without strings attached? I paused, considering. My initial thought had been to leave her absolutely nothing, a harsh, definitive cut. But the years of teaching, of fostering growth and understanding, had left an indelible mark. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice and, perhaps, a chance for her to truly reflect on her actions. No, I said, my voice firm. Not without strings, Richard. A trust. A small, carefully managed trust, accessible only if she can prove sustained financial responsibility for a period of 5 years. And only if she commits to professional financial counseling, documented and verified. It won't be enough to solve her problems, only enough to help her help herself. And she must never, under any circumstances, attempt to access my remaining funds. My eyes hardened. This isn't a handout, Richard. It's a challenge. A final lesson, perhaps, in accountability. Richard nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding on his face. A wise decision, Eleanor. Harsh, perhaps, but fair. It gives her a path, should she choose to walk it. But the control remains firmly in your hands. As I signed the documents, each stroke of the pen felt like a physical release. The weight that had been pressing on my soul for months, years even, began to lift. This wasn't just a new will, it was a new contract with life itself. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of my own destiny, the guardian of my own legacy. And Sarah, my once beloved daughter, would soon discover that the old woman she had so carelessly cast aside had found not only her voice, but her power. My preparations were almost complete. The stage was set for the final act. With the new will signed and secured, a profound sense of calm settled over me, a quiet, almost spiritual peace that had eluded me for years. It wasn't the peace of resignation, but the invigorating calm that follows a carefully considered decision. I was no longer drifting. I was steering my own ship, and the currents were now, finally, flowing in my direction. The initial shock of the lottery win had transformed into a clear-headed strategy, and the bitter sting of betrayal had solidified into unshakable resolve. My new apartment, once a mere escape, truly became a home. I bought a few modest pieces of furniture, choosing comfort and utility over extravagance. I filled the small balcony with pots of geraniums and herbs, miniature versions of the garden I'd left behind, but imbued with a fresh, personal meaning. My books, carefully selected from storage, now lined a new bookshelf, their familiar spines a comforting presence. I started taking long walks in the nearby park, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the changing colors of the leaves, feeling the sun on my face, truly alive for the first time in what felt like forever. Daniel continued to be an invaluable, if unwitting, ally. He'd helped me organize all the evidence I'd meticulously gathered against Sarah and Mark, the public records of their debts, the attempts to access my property, the forwarded voicemail messages that so clearly demonstrated her duplicity and manipulation. We created digital folders, secured with passwords, a virtual fortress for the truth. He thought he was teaching an old lady about file management. In reality, he was helping me build my case. I even started keeping a journal, a detailed account of my days, my thoughts, my interactions, knowing that every detail might one day be important. It was a habit I'd taught my literature students, careful observation and clear articulation. Now, I was applying it to my own life. I also began to cultivate a new circle of friends, a chosen family. Martha, my kind nurse from Evergreen Meadows, became a regular visitor. I'd offered to pay for her time, but she always refused, simply enjoying our conversations and my home-baked cookies. She told me stories about the facility, about Clara, who had sadly passed away, but whose quiet defiance had left a lasting impression on Martha. Through Martha, I stayed connected, but from a safe distance, to the world I had escaped. Then there was Beatrice, my new neighbor from 2 floors down, a retired art historian with a dry wit and an encyclopedic knowledge of local history. We'd share tea and discuss everything from town politics to the latest exhibitions at the museum. She brought a lively intellectual energy that reminded me of my teaching days, and with her, I could be myself, Eleanor Vance, the woman who loved ideas and intelligent conversation, not just the poor old lady Sarah had tried to make me. These moments of genuine connection, these small joys, were precious. They were the true dividends of my lottery win, far more valuable than any sum of money. They reinforced my decision, steeling my resolve for the inevitable confrontation. I wasn't doing this out of spite, I told myself, though a part of me certainly felt the burn of righteous anger. I was doing it for my own integrity, for the dignity that Sarah had tried to strip away. And, perhaps, as a final, painful lesson for her. I thought often about the moment Sarah would finally find me. I imagined her outrage, her feigned hurt, her inevitable attempts to manipulate me with guilt and tears. I rehearsed my responses in my mind, calm and measured, armed with the undeniable facts I had painstakingly collected. I would not allow her to twist the narrative, to cast herself as the wrong daughter. The quiet, compliant Eleanor was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced abandonment and found her own strength. The $300,000, while life-changing, wasn't being squandered. Richard had helped me set up a sensible investment plan, ensuring I had a stable income and a secure future. I wasn't going to live lavishly, but I would live comfortably, without fear of being a burden, without the constant anxiety that had subtly permeated my life before. One evening, as I watched the city lights twinkle outside my window, a sense of profound clarity washed over me. Sarah had done me a perverse favor. By casting me out, she had forced me to confront a truth I had long avoided, that my life, for too long, had been defined by my relationships, particularly with her, and not by my own intrinsic worth. She had, in her selfishness, liberated me. The confrontation would be difficult, I knew. But I was ready. I had found my voice, my autonomy, and my purpose. And no matter what Sarah threw at me, I would stand firm. The discarded old woman had risen, and she was ready for the fight. The knock came precisely at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, an insistent, almost demanding rap that vibrated through the sturdy oak of my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Martha usually called first. Beatrice, my neighbor, would send a polite text. This was different. This was impatient. My heart, which had settled into a comfortable rhythm in my new life, gave a sudden, sharp lurch. I knew, with an unsettling certainty, who was on the other side. Sarah. The final act was upon us. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my cardigan, a small, almost automatic gesture of preparation. The old Eleanor, the one who would have rushed to the door with nervous anticipation, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had meticulously prepared for this moment, a woman armed with facts, resolve, and a quiet, steely core. I opened the door slowly, just enough to reveal my face. Sarah stood there, framed by the afternoon light, a stark contrast to the shadowy interior of my hallway. Her blonde hair was a little disheveled, her expensive suit slightly rumpled, and her face was a mask of furious indignation. Her eyes, usually so carefully composed, were wild, a storm brewing behind them. "Mom," she breathed, her voice a mixture of shock and disbelief, as if she were seeing a ghost. Her gaze swept past me, taking in the small, tastefully decorated entryway, the glimpse of my new, unfamiliar living room. The shock quickly morphed into resentment. "What is this place? What are you doing here?" I pushed the door open fully, inviting her in with a gesture that was more command than welcome. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my voice calm, steady, betraying none of the tremor I felt deep within. "Please, come in." She hesitated for a moment, as if my unexpected composure had thrown her off balance, then swept past me into the apartment. She walked into the living room, her eyes darting around, taking in the framed photographs, the neatly arranged books, the potted plants on the balcony. There was no warmth in her gaze, no relief, only a predatory assessment. "Mom, what in God's name is going on?" she demanded, turning to face me, her hands on her hips. "Evergreen Meadows said you just left. No explanation, no forwarding address. Do you have any idea how worried I've been? How long I've been trying to find you?" Her voice rose, laced with a familiar whine of self-pity. I walked to the small armchair opposite the sofa and sat down, carefully arranging my hands in my lap. "Worried, Sarah? Or inconvenienced?" I asked, my voice soft, but with an edge that surprised even myself. Her jaw tightened. "How dare you? I'm your daughter. I've been calling your old number incessantly. I even called Aunt Helen. She had no idea where you were. What kind of game are you playing?" "No game, Sarah," I replied, meeting her furious gaze directly. "Simply a change of address. And phone number. A new chapter, as you so aptly put it on my birthday." The mention of her own words seemed to deflate her slightly, but only for a moment. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't a new chapter, Mom. This is erratic behavior. And frankly, it's irresponsible. You know you have responsibilities to consider." "Dear family." "My family?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping me. The family that deposited me, like an unwanted package, at a nursing home on my 75th birthday? The family that ignored my calls for days, then weeks? The family that then used my own legal documents to try and track me down? Her face flushed crimson. "That's unfair. We placed you there for your own good. It was the best decision for you, for your health. That big house was too much. You were lonely. You needed professional care." The words tumbled out, a rehearsed litany of justifications. "And my house?" I pressed, my voice still quiet, but firm. "The one you were so eager to take out a reverse mortgage on? The one you seemed to think was your inheritance before I was even in the ground." The color drained from her face. Her eyes flickered, a moment of genuine shock. She hadn't expected me to know. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "That's absurd. I would never." "Wouldn't you, Sarah?" I interrupted, my gaze unwavering. "Your financial records, the multiple mortgages on your own home, Mark's gambling debts, the foreclosures on your rental properties. I know about all of it. Every hidden loan, every desperate scheme. I've seen the paper trail, Sarah. A rather extensive one, I might add." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. The carefully constructed facade of the concerned, wronged daughter had shattered. In its place was raw, unadulterated fear. You don't know anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh, I know quite a lot, actually," I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "More than enough to understand exactly why you dropped me off at Evergreen Meadows like an inconvenient piece of luggage. It wasn't for my health, Sarah. It was for my assets. For my house. For any last bit of money you thought you could extract from me." Her breath hitched. She took a step back, as if I had physically struck her. The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and years of hidden truths. This wasn't the Sarah I knew. This was a cornered animal, stripped of its camouflage. And then I continued, my voice gaining a quiet power, "A week after my 75th birthday, a week after you abandoned me in that sterile place, something rather extraordinary happened." I paused, letting the suspense hang in the air, watching her face, her eyes wide with a mixture of dread and dawning realization. "I won the lottery, Sarah. Not a paltry sum. A significant one. Enough to buy this apartment. Enough to secure my future. Enough to finally, truly, be free." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with their impact. Sarah's face crumpled. It wasn't a cry of joy, or even of genuine remorse. It was a strangled gasp of pure, unadulterated, avaricious regret. She hadn't just lost a mother, she had lost a fortune. And in that moment, in her eyes, I saw not a daughter, but a predator. Sarah stood frozen, her face a grotesque tableau of shock, disbelief, and a chilling, nascent avarice that made my stomach churn. The carefully constructed indignation, the pretense of concern, all of it had crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath. She hadn't worried about me. She had worried about the financial resource I represented, a resource she now realized she had carelessly thrown away. The lottery, she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper, barely recognizable. Her eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted around the room, as if searching for a hidden camera, a trick, anything to negate the impossible truth. You won the lottery? How much? The question, when it came, was naked in its greed. I met her gaze, my own eyes unblinking. Enough, Sarah. Enough to ensure I will never again be a burden to anyone. Enough to choose my own path, my own home, my own company. I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the realization dawn on her face, not just of my freedom, but of her catastrophic miscalculation. Enough, in short, to completely rewrite my will. That was the final blow. Her breath hitched, a strangled sound, and she clutched at her chest as if physically wounded. Your will? What are you talking about? I'm your daughter. I'm your sole beneficiary. The words were a desperate plea, an assertion of a right she believed was inviolable. Not anymore, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion, a cool, precise instrument. I rose from my armchair and walked to my desk, returning with a slim, leather-bound folder. Inside, I carefully extracted a notarized copy of my new will and a stack of printed documents. When you so kindly decided I needed professional care at Evergreen Meadows, you signed documents asserting power of attorney, I began, my voice steady. I have since, with the help of a very competent lawyer, revoked that power. I am of sound mind, Sarah, and fully capable of making my own decisions. As these documents attest, I held up the revocation papers, clearly visible, their official seals glinting in the light. Her eyes flickered wildly from the papers to my face, then to the will. A tremor started in her hands. You wouldn't, she whispered, a desperate, childish plea. You wouldn't cut me out. Not after everything. I'm your daughter, Mom. Yes, you are, I agreed, a faint, melancholic note entering my voice. And as your mother, I taught you about consequences. About honesty. About respect. Lessons you seem to have forgotten. I laid the new will on the coffee table, pushing it gently towards her. This is a copy of my last will and testament, signed and witnessed last week. You will find that your name is indeed present, Sarah. As is Mark's. She snatched the document, her fingers fumbling with the pages. Her eyes scanned the text frantically, searching, her lips moving silently. She found the relevant section, and her face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. Her hands began to shake violently, causing the papers to rustle. This is ridiculous, she finally shrieked, her voice cracking. A trust? For a symbolic sum? Only if I prove financial responsibility? And professional counseling? This is an insult. This is vindictive. You're disinheriting me. I am securing my legacy, Sarah. I corrected her, my voice rising slightly, hardening with each word. A legacy that reflects my true values and the people who truly care for me, not those who see me as a cash cow. Then I presented the final, damning evidence. I placed the stack of printouts on the table, next to the will. And these, I continued, gesturing to the papers, are the fruits of my erratic behavior. Records of your multiple mortgages, your spiraling credit card debt, Mark's history of failed ventures and gambling. The attempts to secure a reverse mortgage on my house, while I was supposedly safely tucked away in Evergreen Meadows. Even the desperate voicemails you left, laced with veiled threats and legalistic jargon, once you realized I had vanished. Her eyes darted over the documents, her face contorting with a mixture of shame and fury. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The sheer volume of evidence, meticulously compiled and presented, seemed to crush her. You cast me aside, Sarah, I said, my voice now a low, resonant hum, filled with the pain of the past, but underscored by the triumph of the present. You threw me away like yesterday's trash. And in doing so, you freed me. You freed me from the constant worry of your financial demands, from the weight of your manipulative promises. You freed me to find my own strength, my own path. You made me realize that the only person I can truly rely on is myself. She finally looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, not of sorrow, but of desperate, frustrated rage. "You can't do this to me," she wailed, her voice cracking. "I'm your daughter. I'll sue. I'll say you're senile, that you're not of sound mind, that you've been manipulated." I smiled, a thin, humorless smile. "You can try, Sarah. But I have a lawyer, a notarized will, and ample documentation to prove my capacity. And I have the testimony of numerous people, including your own mother, about your actions leading up to my relocation to Evergreen Meadows. I believe the courts would find my narrative far more compelling than yours." I paused, letting the implication sink in. "Besides, what would that do to your reputation? To Mark's? To your children's standing in the community? Do you truly want to drag all of that into a very public, very messy court battle?" She collapsed onto the sofa, a ragged, guttural sob tearing from her throat. It was not the sound of a daughter mourning a lost mother, but of a woman mourning a lost inheritance, a lost opportunity, a future shattered by her own cruel hand. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, her carefully constructed world imploding around her. I watched her, felt a brief, fleeting pang of what might have once been pity, but it was quickly subsumed by a sense of profound, hard-won peace. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice. It was the closing of a chapter, not with a whimper, but with a resounding, undeniable declaration. "You said I needed a new chapter, Sarah," I said, my voice clear and strong. "You were right. And this, right here, right now, is the beginning of it. Without you." Sarah's sobs, choked and raw, echoed in the quiet apartment for a long, uncomfortable moment. They were the sounds of a house of cards collapsing, not of a heart broken by genuine loss. I watched her, a detached observer, feeling a complex mix of emotions, a flicker of the old maternal pain, quickly replaced by the cold satisfaction of truth revealed, and finally, a quiet, profound sense of liberation. She had made her bed, and now she would lie in it. Eventually, her sobs subsided into ragged breaths. She looked up, her face tear-streaked and blotchy, her eyes swollen. There was still anger in them, a raw, wounded fury, but it was mixed now with a dawning, terrifying despair. You've ruined me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "How could you do this to your own daughter? How could you do this to your own mother, Sarah?" I countered, my voice steady, betraying no hint of the emotional toll this confrontation had taken. "I didn't ruin you. Your choices did. Your greed. Your deceit. I merely chose to stop enabling it." She scrambled to her feet, gathering the printed documents and the will, as if they were venomous snakes. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice laced with venom. "I'll fight this. You're old, you're confused. I'll get lawyers, You'll waste what little money you have left," I finished for her, my gaze unwavering. "And you'll drag your family's financial ruin through the courts, a public spectacle for all to see. Do you truly want that, Sarah? For your children to read about their mother and father's gambling debts, their failed ventures, their attempts to exploit an elderly woman." Her shoulders slumped. The threat of public exposure, the shame she so carefully cultivated a facade to avoid, was a powerful deterrent. She understood the implication. She knew, deep down, that her carefully constructed world of appearances couldn't withstand the scrutiny I could bring to bear. She didn't say another word. With a final, furious glance that held no love, no regret, only bitter hatred, she turned and stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door behind her. The sound reverberated through the quiet rooms, a definitive, echoing finality. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the fading sound of her footsteps, then the distant thud of the building's main door closing. The apartment was silent once more, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of peace, of a battle won, of a heavy burden finally lifted. The days that followed brought a fresh wave of calm. Sarah made no further attempts to contact me, nor did I hear any legal rumblings. The threat of public humiliation had, it seemed, proven more potent than any legal battle. I knew she would struggle. Her financial situation was dire, and without my constant infusions of cash, and with her primary inheritance gone, she and Mark would have to face the consequences of their choices head-on. It wasn't a happy ending for her, no. But it was a necessary one, a chance for her to confront reality, perhaps for the very first time. For me, life began anew, richer and more meaningful than I could have imagined. I embraced my freedom with gusto. I invested a portion of the lottery winnings wisely, securing a comfortable, modest income that allowed me to live without financial worry. Another portion, as per my will, was quietly earmarked for a fund at the local library, a cause I had championed throughout my teaching career. I reached out to Martha, not with money, but with genuine friendship. She was delighted to visit, often bringing me stories from evergreen meadows, and we'd spend hours discussing books and life. I also continued to cultivate my friendships with Daniel and Beatrice. Daniel, ever the practical one, helped me set up a small online investment portfolio, teaching me about stocks and bonds with the same earnest enthusiasm he applied to troubleshooting my Wi-Fi. Beatrice and I started a small book club with a few other local seniors, filling my apartment with lively discussions and the scent of freshly brewed tea. My apartment, once just a safe haven, became a vibrant hub. It wasn't the bustling family home of my youth, but it was a home filled with chosen family, with laughter, and with genuine affection. I realized that the quiet life I'd led for so long had indeed been a mask, not for conflict, but for a slow, agonizing suffocation. Now, truly unmasked, I could breathe. One afternoon, months after Sarah's visit, I received a small, unassuming envelope in the mail. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, enclosing a brief, formal letter. Sarah and Mark had filed for bankruptcy. It was a bleak end to their pursuit of a life they couldn't afford, a stark testament to the consequences I had warned her about. There was no emotion in me as I read it, only a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. My own life, though, was blossoming. I rediscovered old passions, painting watercolors, learning a new language online, even volunteering at the local animal shelter. I wasn't seeking a Hollywood happy ending with reconciliation and grand gestures. My ending was quieter, more profound. It was the wisdom gained from pain, the strength forged in betrayal, the deep, abiding peace of self-reliance. I had faced the ultimate abandonment, and in doing so, had found myself. The sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a fitting end to a long, full day. I sat on my balcony, a cup of herbal tea in hand, watching the world go by. My new will, my new phone number, my new home, they were not just symbols of my independence. They were monuments to my resilience. My legacy was no longer a question of what I left behind, but how I chose to live, and who I chose to share that life with. And it was magnificent.